Okay, so this morning, like I said, we are in Second Samuel chapter 2 and likely chapter 3. Where we are picking up last week, we read about the death of Saul and Jonathan. And understanding that helps the very first sentence of chapter 2 make more sense. So let's go ahead and do our read through of chapter 2, and then we can unpack. In the course of time, David inquired of the Lord, "Shall I go up to one of the towns of Judah?" he asked. The Lord said, "Go up." David asked, "Where shall I go?" "To Hebron," the Lord answered. So David went up there with his two wives, Ahinoam of Jezreel and Abigail, the widow of Nabal of Carmel. David also took the men who were with him, each with his family, and they settled in Hebron in its town. Then the men of Judah came to Hebron, and there they anointed David king over the tribe of Judah. When David was told that it was the men from Jabesh Gilead who had buried Saul, he sent messengers to them to say, "The Lord bless you for showing kindness to Saul your master by burying him. May the Lord now show you kindness and faithfulness, and I too will show you the same favor because you have done this. Now then, be strong and brave, for Saul your master is dead, and the people of Judah have anointed me king over them." Meanwhile, Abner, son of Ner, the commander of Saul's army, had taken Ishbosheth, son of Saul, and brought him over to Mahanaim. He made him king over Gilead, Ashuri, and Jezreel, and over Ephraim, Benjamin, and all Israel. Ishbosheth, son of Saul, was 40 years old when he became king over Israel, and he reigned 2 years. The tribe of Judah, however, remained loyal to David. The length of time David was king in Hebron over Judah was 7 years and 6 months. Abner, son of Ner, together with the men of Ishbosheth, son of Saul, left Mahanaim and went to Gibeon. Joab, son of Zeruiah, and David's men went out and met them at the pool of Gibeon. One group sat down on one side of the pool and one group on the other side. Then Abner said to Joab, "Let's have some of the young men get up and fight hand to hand in front of us." "All right, let them do it," Joab said. So they stood up and were counted off, 12 men of Benjamin, or for Benjamin, and Ishbosheth, the son of Saul, and 12 for David. Each each man grabbed his opponent by the head and thrust his dagger into his opponent's side, and they fell down to. So that place in Gibeon was called Helkath Zarurim. The battle that day was fierce, and Abner and the Israelites were defeated by David's men. The three sons of Zeruiah were there: Joab, Abishai, and Asahel. Now, Asahel was as fleet-footed as a wild gazelle. He chased Abner, turning neither to the right nor to the left as he pursued him. Abner looked ahead of him and asked, "Is that you, Asahel?" "It is," he answered. Then Abner said to him, "Turn aside to the right or to the left. Take on one of the young men and strip him of his weapons." But Asahel would not stop chasing him. Again, Abner warned Asahel, "Stop chasing me. Why should I strike you down? How could I look your brother Joab in the face?" But Asahel refused to give up the pursuit. So Abner thrust the butt of his spear into Asahel's stomach, and the spear came out through his back. He fell there, and he died on the spot. And every man stopped when he came to the place where Asahel had fallen and died. But Joab and Abishai pursued Abner, and as the sun was setting, they came to the hill of Ammah, near Giah, on the way to the wasteland of Gibeon. Then the men of Benjamin rallied behind Abner, they formed themselves into a group and took their stand on top of a hill. Abner called out to Joab, "Must the sword devour forever? Don't you realize that this will end in bitterness? How long before you order your men to stop pursuing their fellow Israelites?" Joab answered, "As surely as God lives, if you had not spoken, the men would have continued pursuing them until morning." So Joab blew the trumpet, and all the troops came to a halt. They no longer pursued Israel, nor did they fight any more. All that night, Abner and his men marched through Arabah. They crossed the Jordan, continued through the morning hours, and came to Ahinoam. Then Joab stopped pursuing Abner and assembled the whole army. Besides Azael, 19 of David's men were found missing. But David's men had killed 360 Benjamites who were with Abner. They took Azael and buried him in his father's tomb at Bethlehem. Then Joab and his men marched all night and arrived at Hebron by daybreak. That's chapter 2. What is going on here? Lots of historical detail are in chapters 2 and 3. Thoughts or comments before we start to unpack this?
They were doing fighting like today bikers get together and do.
Interesting. Yeah, so what we actually see here is a civil war going on. So chapter 2 starts with the phrase "in the course of time." So that phrase "in the course of time" is a connector to what happened in the previous chapters. What happened in the previous chapters was the death of Saul and Jonathan. So "in the course of time" says after their death and a period of mourning. So after the deaths of Saul and Jonathan and a period of mourning, then David inquired of the Lord. And this is a distinctive for David. David, even though he wasn't required to or didn't have to, he was always relying and inquiring of the Lord. And notice what he says is, "Shall I go up to one of the towns of Judah?" So he is still living in Ziklag in Philistine territory. He's not in Israel at this moment. And he asks the Lord, "Shall I go up to one of the towns of Judah?" So David is from the territory that belonged to the tribe of Judah. He was a Bethlehemite, and he asked the Lord, "Where should I go in Judah?" But actually, he says, "Should I go up to Judah?" And then the Lord says, "Yes, go up." And David says, "Well, where should I go?" And the Lord says, "To Hebron." So David, being obedient to what God has told him, goes up to Hebron with his two wives, Ahinoam and Abigail. And also traveling with David or relocating with David from Ziklag or from Philistine territory into the territory of Judah were all of the men that were following David and lived with David in Ziklag. So last count, that was about 600 men and their wives and their children. So this was sort of a big group. Now, why Hebron? Because Hebron is kind of got a couple of distinctives. First off, Hebron was a royal city for the Canaanites before the Israelites moved into the Promised Land. So Hebron had a long history of being a royal city. The other is that Hebron was defined as one of the sanctuary cities. And I don't know if you're all familiar with this, but during Old Testament times, there were a few sanctuary cities. Now, what was the purpose of a sanctuary city? So this was part of God's provision of for the legal system of Israel. So if a person had killed someone accidentally, now we're not talking about premeditated murder, we're talking about an accidental death, what we would call manslaughter. Um, Instead of waiting for the surviving family members of the deceased to take retribution out on you, an eye for an eye, you could escape to a sanctuary city, and you would actually run up to the altar of God, and you would hold on to the horn of the altar. So the altars had these what they called the horns. They were like if you had taken a sphere and then cut the sphere in half. So now you had a dome, and then you cut the dome into four corners. Each of those four quarters would be put on a corner of a square stone-shaped altar. You would hold on to one of those horns, and you would be considered legally safe. And what that allowed was a priest of the Lord to work as a mediator between the family of the deceased and the accused to figure out what actually happened and what went on. So Hebron was one of those sanctuary cities, and that's going to become important later as we continue in the story. And also, that's where the phrase the sanctuary cities that we know today, it has a different connotation and purpose today, but that's where that actually comes from. All right, so verse 2, David went up with his two wives, Ahinoam of Jezreel and Abigail, the widow of Nabal of Carmel. David also took the men who were with him, each with his family, and they settled in Hebron and its towns. Then the men of Judah came to Hebron, and there they anointed David king over the tribe of Judah. So David has already been anointed by Samuel, much younger, several years ago now. He's already been anointed once by God to be the future king of Israel. And now the elders of Judah, the leaders of Judah, come to David and they anoint him, ceremonially accepting him as the king of Judah. Now, notice we're saying king of Judah and we're not saying king of Israel. So, Judah is one of the 12 tribes. Each tribe was given an area of the promised land. The tribe of Judah, part of the territory of Judah included Bethlehem. So this is David's people, David's tribe, and the elders coming before David and anointing him king of Judah. And this is the first step as God brings David into being the king over all of Israel. Right now, this is just the first step. He's been anointed king over just the tribe of Judah. When David was told that it was the men from Jabesh Gilead who had buried Saul, he sent messengers to them to say, "The Lord bless you for showing this kindness to Saul, your master, by burying him. May the Lord now show you kindness and faithfulness, and I too will show you the same favor because you have done this. Now then, be strong and brave, for Saul your master is dead, and the people of Judah have anointed me king over them." So, what is David doing here? Is this actually a political move? I do not have any doubt about David's sincerity in this act. I think that he was sincerely appreciative of the men of Jabesh Gilead for sneaking into Bethshan and taking Saul and the bodies of his three sons, Jonathan and the other two sons who died in battle, taking them, cutting them down from being hung on the wall of the city, and then taking them and burning their bodies, and then taking the remains and burying them. I think he was very appreciative that they had done that, and they had shown Saul respect, the proper respect, and making sure that the Philistine people didn't abuse the remains, abuse the remains more than they already had. Now then, be strong and be brave, for Saul your master is dead, saying that we're in a time of transition. And then he says, and the people of Judah have anointed me king over them. So he's informing them that he's moving into this position of king. And it's a political move. Like I said, it's not insincere, but it's a political move because he is wanting to bring them into the fold to garner their future support, to inform them that he has been made king of Judah. And at this moment, and David actually never does, David himself isn't making a claim over ruling over all of Israel, right? So he's not moving for position. How old is David at this point? Well, he's 30 years old. So he was anointed by Samuel when he was a young man. Then he was called to Samuel's court to be his musician, playing when Saul was tormented by the the demon, the angel of the Lord, the evil spirit that the Lord sent to Saul. Then he was, married to Saul's daughter, Michal, and then he was, a leader in Saul's army, and each, of these steps is growing David's learning and understanding of what it takes to be a king, what is required to run a country, what is required to be a commander of the army. And it's kind of interesting to see the baby steps that God is providing or presenting to David. So, because David, I mean, who is David? He was just a shepherd boy. And if you think about it, it's kind of interesting when Samuel came to Jesse, when God said, "Look, Samuel, stop lamenting over how poor King Saul is. I've got somebody better for you, and I want to introduce them to you. So I want you to go see Jesse because it's one of his sons." And that's all the information that Samuel had. He goes and sees Jesse. Jesse starts bringing his sons in, and God tells Samuel for the first one, who was very handsome and looked very kingly, "No, that's not him." And the next one he brings in, who was equally as handsome and looked equally as kingly, and God says to Samuel, "No, it's not that one." And same all the way through to the first six sons. But Samuel knew that God told him that it was one of Jesse's sons that he was going to be anointing as the future king of Israel. And so he says to Jesse, "Is this all your sons?" And Jesse, as an afterthought, says, "Oh, yeah, I completely forgot about David. I got one more. He's the youngest of my sons, but, he's out there in the fields watching my flocks." I mean, literally, when Samuel came to talk with Jesse and to meet Jesse's sons, David was an afterthought. And so Jesse had David brought in, and God tells Samuel, "This is the one. This is the guy." Because we all look at the outside of a person and we judge whether they fit the role that they're in. Does it make sense? They look presidential. Oh, well, they look professional, or oh, they look like a ball player. We look on the outside, but God looks on the inside, and he knew David's character. And if you think about it for a moment, right? So David goes through this period of time as a young man living in Saul's palace, and then Saul getting jealous of David, realizing that David is indeed going to be the future king, that Saul's royal line was not going to continue past his sons, and becoming jealous, so jealous of David that he begins to pursue and chase to kill him. So David is on the run from Saul for 10 years. So that means that he was about 20 years old when Saul started chasing him. And it's been about 10 years now, and David is now 30 years old. And I think that this is an insight into David's character, that he was a patient person, that he believed God and what God had told him, God had promised him. And he was not pushing. He was not, trying to climb the corporate ladder. He was willing to wait for God's timing. And in God's timing, where David may have thought, well, I'm Saul's replacement, he was content at just returning to Judah and being the king over Judah. He wasn't looking to land grab, and he wasn't looking to take over the throne of all Israel. But as would normally happen in the royal line of succession, the next son in line would be the next king. And so that's what Abner does. Now, you remember Abner is the commander of Saul's army. He has been loyal to Saul for many years now. And so, following that normal progression, Abner installs the only surviving son of Saul to be the next king of Israel, Ishbosheth. And he was 40 years old at this time. Now, it doesn't mean that Ishbosheth was the most qualified, but if you did it the way that man normally does it, Ishbosheth would be to be the next king. We all know that God has already anointed David to be the future king of Israel. So, how do these two things come together? It caused conflict and it caused a civil war. So, now, verse 8 Meanwhile, Abner, son of Ner, the commander of Saul's army, had taken Ishbosheth, son of Saul, and brought him over to Mahanaim. He made him king over Gilead, Ashuri, Jezreel, and over Ephraim, Benjamin, and all of Israel. So, where David was anointed king of Judah, remember that's only one of 12 tribes, the territory belonging to the other 11 tribes of Israel is what Abner installed Ishbosheth to be the king of. The length of time David was king in Hebron over Judah was 7 years and 6 months. Again, pointing out the patience of David and willing to wait for God's timing for things to occur instead of pushing his will on the circumstances. Then we have this weird circumstance here. Abner, son of Ner, together with the men of Ishbosheth, son of Saul, left Mahanaim and went to Gibeon. Joab, son of Zeruiah, and David's men went out and met them at the pool of Gibeon. One group sat down on one side of the pool and one group on the other. So, who is Zeruiah? That is one of David's sisters. So, Joab is actually David's nephew. Joab and Asahel are David's nephews. One group sat on one side of the pool, and one group sat on the other. Then Abner said to Joab, now, the reason that this is significant is Abner is still the captain of Saul's army, now under Ishbosheth. And gotta find my place here. Joab is at this time the captain of David's armies and David's men. So these two captains are facing off each other. And what Abner is suggesting is representative combat. Instead of us all fighting, let's pick a group of men each, equal numbers, and let them duke it out. And that will determine the outcome of the battle. But what we read here is that's not where it ended. So, yes, the two groups of men did face each other off, and then it ensued into an all-out battle. This is similar to the representative combat that we see with David and Goliath. Goliath comes out from the Philistine armies, taunting the Israelite armies. Who is, brave enough to come out and try and attack me? Who is brave enough to come and fight me? And instead of the whole armies fighting against each other, let's just have these two representatives, young David, the shepherd boy, and this giant Goliath. So similarly, Abner suggests that, why don't we both pick two teams of men and we'll pit my team against your team and let's see what the outcome is. Then each man grabbed his opponent by the head and thrust his dagger into his opponent's side, and they fell down together. So they all killed each other, this whole group. So that place in Gibeon was called Helkath Zaruim. The battle that day was very fierce. Okay, so then after the representative combat was over, then it turned into a full-scale battle. The battle that day was very fierce, and Abner and the Israelites were defeated by David's men. So David's men won the battle handily. The three sons of Zeruiah were there: Joab, Abishai, and Asael. Now, Asael was as fleet-footed as a wild gazelle, and he chased Abner. So Asael, he had Abner in his sights. And even though the battle was over, Asael continued to chase Abner. And he was so focused, he turned neither to the right nor to the left as he pursued him. It was obvious that Asael had no one in his sights besides Abner. He was focused. Abner looked behind him and asked, "Is that you, Asael?" "It is," he answered. Then Abner said to him, "Turn aside to the right or to the left. So, stop your pursuit. Why don't you go ahead and continue on your way? Uh, Take one of the young men and strip him down of his weapons." But Asael would not stop chasing him. Again, Abner warned Asael, "Stop chasing me. Why should I strike you down? How could I look your brother Joab in the face?" Not that Abner had any allegiances to uh, uh, his brother Joab, but but he says, how can I look him in the face? If you continue to chase me, you're going to force me to kill you, and then how can I face Joab knowing that I had taken your life? But Azael refused to give up the pursuit, so Abner thrust the butt of his spear into Azael's stomach, and the spear came out through his back. He fell there and died on the spot. And every man stopped when he came to the place where Azael had fallen dead and died. But Joab and Abishai pursued Abner, and as the sun was setting, they came to the hill of Ammah, near Giah, on the way to the wasteland of Gibeon. Then the men of Benjamin rallied behind Abner. They formed themselves into a group and took stand on top of a hill. They were preparing themselves for battle. They were attempting to give themselves the high ground advantage. Abner called out to Joab, "Must the sword devour forever? Don't you realize that this will end in bitterness? How long before you order your men to stop pursuing their fellow Israelites? This is brother fighting against brother, cousin against cousin, similar to the Civil War in the United States that we experienced, where family members were fighting family members." Joab answered, "As surely as God lives, if you had not spoken, the men would have continued pursuing them until morning." So Joab, is saying, yes, let's take a pause here. Let's let cooler heads prevail. And honestly, if you wouldn't have said anything about this, we would have kept chasing you easily until morning. So Joab blew the trumpet, and all the troops came to a halt. They no longer pursued Israel, nor did they fight anymore. So this battle is done in this civil war between the men of David and the men of Ishbosheth. All that night, Abner and his men marched through Arabah. They crossed the Jordan, continued through the morning hours, and came to Mahanaim, Mahanaim was where Abner took Ishbosheth and to set it up as his royal city. Then Joab stopped pursuing Abner and assembled the whole army. Besides Abishai, or Asael, sorry, 19 of David's men were found missing. So only 19 of David's men fell. Verse 31, but David's men had killed 360 Benjamites who were with Abner. So 360 men, you can see that the number of the Benjamite men, or the men that were loyal to Ishbosheth, far outnumbered the men who had died in battle that were loyal to David. Verse 32, they took Asael and buried him in his father's tomb in Bethlehem. Then Joab and his men marched all night and arrived at Hebron by daybreak. So what's the significance here is that the battle is over. The civil war, although there's still ill feelings on both sides, both groups of men, both armies return to base. They return home. Let's turn to chapter 3. And any thoughts before we go ahead and read through chapter 3? Chapter 3, verse 1. The war between the house of Saul and the house of David lasted a long time. David grew stronger and stronger, while the house of Saul grew weaker and weaker. Sons were born to David in Hebron. His firstborn was Ammon, the son of Ahinoam of Jezreel. His second son, Caleb, the son of Abigail, the widow of Nabal of Carmel. The third, Absalom, the son of Maacah, daughter of Talmai, king of Jeshur. The fourth, Abinijah, the son of Haggith. The fifth, Shephatiah, the son of Abital. And the sixth, Ithraam, the son of David's wife Eglah. These were born to David in Hebron. So one thing that we gain from this paragraph here at the beginning of 2 Samuel is David took on more wives. Let's continue with the read through. During the war between the house of Saul and the house of David, Abner had been strengthening his own position in the house of Saul. Now Saul had a concubine named Rizpah, daughter of Aiah, and Ishbosheth said to Abner, "Why did you sleep with my father's concubine?" Abner was very angry because of what Ishbosheth said. So he answered, "Am I a dog's head on Judah's side? This very day I am loyal to the house of your father and to his family and friends. I haven't handed you over to David. And now you accuse me of an offense involving this woman? May God deal with Abner, be it ever so severely, if I do not do for David what the Lord promised him on oath, and transfer the kingdom of the house of Saul, and establish David's throne over Israel and Judah from Dan to Beersheba." Ishbosheth did not dare to say another word to Abner because he was afraid of him. Then Abner sent messengers on his behalf to say to David, "Whose land is it? Make an agreement with me, and I will help you bring all Israel over to you." "Good," said David, "I will make an agreement with you, but I demand one thing of you. Do not come into my presence unless you bring Michal, daughter of Saul, when you come to see me." Then David sent messengers to Ishbosheth, son of Saul, demanding, "Give me my wife Michal, whom I betrothed to myself for the price of 100 Philistine foreskins." So Ishbosheth gave orders and had her taken from her husband Paltiel, son of Laish. Her husband, however, went with her, weeping behind her all the way to Bahurim. Then Abner said to him, "Go home." So he went back. Abner conferred with the elders of Israel and said, "For some time you have wanted to make David your king. Now do it. For the Lord promised David, By my servant David, I will rescue my people Israel from the hand of the Philistines and from the hand of all their enemies. Abner also spoke to the Benjamites in person. Then he went to Hebron to tell David everything that Israel and the whole tribe of Benjamin wanted to do. When Abner, who had 20 men with him, came to David at Hebron, David prepared a feast for him and his men. Then Abner said to David, "Let me go at once and assemble all Israel for my lord the king, so that they may make a covenant with you, and that you may rule over all that your heart desires." So David sent Abner away, and he went in peace. Just then David's men and Joab returned from a raid and brought with them a great deal of plunder. But Abner was no longer with David in Hebron, because David sent him away and he had gone in peace. When Joab and the soldiers with him arrived, he was told that Abner, son of Ner, had come to the king and that the king had sent him away and that he had gone in peace. So Joab went to the king and said, "What have you done? Look, Abner came to you. Why did you not? Why did you let him go? Now he is gone. You know, Abner, son of Ner, he came to deceive you and observe your movements and find out everything you are doing." Joab then left David and sent messengers after Abner, and they brought him back from the cistern at Sirah. But David did not know it. Now, when Abner returned to Hebron, Joab took him aside into an inner chamber as if to speak with him privately, and there to avenge the blood of his brother Azael. Joab stabbed him in the stomach and he died. Later, when David heard about this, he said, "I and my kingdom are forever innocent before the Lord concerning the blood of Abner, son of Ner. May his blood fall on the head of Joab and on his whole family. May Joab's family never be without someone who has a running sore or leprosy, or who leans on a crutch, or who falls on a sword or who lacks for food." Joab and his brother Abishai murdered Abner because he had killed their brother Azael in the battle at Gibeon. Then David said to Joab and all the people with him, "Tear your clothes and put on sackcloth and walk in mourning in front of Abner." King David himself walked behind the bier. They buried Abner in Hebron, and the king wept aloud at Abner's tomb. All the people wept also. The king sang this lament for Abner: "Should Abner have died as the lawless die? Your hands were not bound, your feet were not fettered. You fell as one falls before the wicked." And all the people wept over him again. Then they all came and urged David to eat something while it was still day. But David took an oath, saying, "May God deal with me, be it ever so severely, if I taste bread or anything else before the sun sets." All the people took note and were pleased. Indeed, everything the king did pleased them. So on that day, all the people there and all Israel knew the king had no part in the murder of Abner, son of Ner. Then the king said to his men, "Do you not realize that a commander and a great man has fallen in Israel this day? And today, though I am anointed king, I am weak. And these, the sons of Zeruiah, are too strong for me. May the Lord repay the evildoer according to his evil deeds." And that ends the reading of chapter 3. Now, notice we have a privilege here to see the transition of David before our very eyes from being the king of Judah to being the king of all Israel. And the author, at a certain point here in chapter 3, the latter part of chapter 3, is not referring very much to David as David, but he refers to him as the king. The king mourned over the death of Abner. So even the language that the author is using in this chapter is showing this transition of David from being the king of Judah into being the king of all the tribes of Israel. All right, so let's go back up to the top and start to unpack this. So it starts out, the war between the house of Saul and the house of David lasted a long time, 7 years and 6 months. David grew stronger and stronger, while the house of Saul grew weaker and weaker. One of the things that we know is that Abner was a very powerful person in Saul's court. And it was Abner who presented and pushed Ishbosheth to be the next king of Israel. And that Ishbosheth was a puppet king. He was, a prop. It was really Abner that was ruling and reigning through Ishbosheth, so that it showed that Abner and his attempt of proxy had legitimacy. So the war lasted a long time between the house of Saul and the house of David. David grew stronger while Saul's house grew weaker. And then we have the additional sons that were born to David and the additional wives that David took. And it's interesting that this is not in line with the guidance that God provided for kings and taking wives in Deuteronomy chapter 17. Um, and what God basically told Moses and is recorded in Deuteronomy is that kings were not to take an excessive amount of wives. It didn't say that the king was to only have one wife. That's not what God told Moses, but he said not an excessive number. And it seems like David is now starting to build a harem. So not only does he have his two current wives, but then we see mentioned here in the additional children, or the children that were born to David at Hebron, we see the addition of 5 more wives. And then David is telling Ishbosheth that he wants his first wife, Michal, back as part of this agreement to a truce. Verse 6, during the war between the house of Saul and the house of David, Abner had been strengthening his own position in the house of Saul, right? He was the one that was really ruling. Now, Saul had had a concubine named Rizpah, daughter of Aiah, and Ishbosheth said to Abner, why did you sleep with my father's concubine? So the fact that Ishbosheth moves into the position of king means that he inherits all of Saul's possessions, including his concubine. So why is it that Abner sleeps with Ishbosheth's concubine? Well, because Abner is really thinking highly of himself and the position that he's attained in being the real ruler, but Abner doesn't have a claim to the throne, at least not a legitimate one, but he does through Ishbosheth. Abner was very angry because of what Ishbosheth said. Why? Why? Because Abner took Ishbosheth's question or questioning as a sign of being disloyal. And Abner's response is, look at all of what I've done for you. You are nothing without me. Verse 8. Abner was very angry because what Ishbosheth said. So he answered, am I a dog's head on Judah's side? So he's basically saying, am I a traitor? This very day I am loyal to the house of your father Saul. Now notice he doesn't say that he's loyal to Ishbosheth. No, no, because Saul was such a formidable figure that even in death, Abner is still loyal to Saul, not loyal to Ishbosheth. This very day I am loyal to the house of your father Saul and to his family and friends. I haven't handed you over to David, right? I could take care of this very easy, Ishbosheth. I could just align with David and turn you over to him. And you know what would happen after that. May God deal with Abner, be it ever so severely, if I do not do for David what the Lord promised him on an oath and transfer the kingdom of the house of Saul and establish David's throne over to Israel and Judah from Dan to Beersheba. So Abner is so angry at what Ishbosheth has accused him of, although it's true, that he says, I'm done. This is the straw that breaks the camel's back. Guess what? I am doing it. I'm aligning myself with David. I am going to make sure that everything that God said was supposed to happen with David, David being anointed the future king of Israel, I'm going to do everything in my power to make that happen. When he says to establish David's throne over Israel from Judah, Israel and Judah from Dan to Beersheba, these two things go together. So the 11 tribes of Israel and Judah, or another way to say that is from Dan to Beersheba, which is saying from one end to the country to the other, is all going to be under David's rule and reign. And that Abner is going to help David achieve that in any way that he can. Verse 12, then Abner sent messengers on his behalf to say to David, whose land is it? Make an agreement with me, and I will help you bring all Israel over to you. So Abner is trying to feather his own bed, right? Trying to set up himself. Because if the civil war continued, David's forces would prevail. And Abner would obviously, as the commander of Saul's army, he would obviously be killed. So if Abner can come to some sort of agreement, some sort of arrangement with David, he might survive this transition of power. Good, said David. I will make an agreement with you, but I demand one thing of you. Do not come into my presence unless you bring me Michal, daughter of Saul, when you come to see me. David wants his first wife back. Then David sent messengers to Ishbosheth, son of Saul, demanding, give me my wife Michal, whom I betrothed to myself for the price of 100 Philistine foreskin. Your father told me that the price, the bride price, was going to be 100 Philistine foreskins, and I gave it to him. I paid that price. She belongs to me. So if Ishbosheth gave orders and had her taken away from her husband, Paltiel, son of Laish. And remember that as part of Saul slamming David, he had given Michal over to another man, which was a huge act of disrespect towards David. It is the equivalent of saying, David is dead to me, right? Because that wouldn't happen. Michal wouldn't become the wife of another man unless she was a widow. So it was the equivalent of Saul saying to David, you are dead to me, and I want to make sure that my daughter's taken care of, so I'm giving her to another man. And David is saying, I want her back. Verse 16, her husband, however, went with her, weeping behind her all the way to Bahurim. Does Paltiel, does that make him seem like a strong man, weeping behind her all the way, following behind her? I can't believe that we're being made to do this. Then Abner said to him, go home. So he says to him, and I feel for the guy, really. I mean, because now Michal has been his wife, or living with him as his wife, for a bunch of years now. And he no doubt loved her. But Abner says, go home. So he went back home. Abner conferred with the elders of Israel and said, for some time you have wanted to make David your king. This is an interesting insight to the intrigue that's going on here, because Abner, like we said, he is ruling by proxy through Ishbosheth. And in Abner's mind, he is being loyal to Saul. And he knows that Ishbosheth is really not up to the job. He is no Saul. He is really not up to the job of being king of Israel. But with Abner's help, the two of them can rule together. And that gives Abner legitimacy. But not everyone is happy with this arrangement. Matter of fact, the elders of Israel, the other 11 tribes, they've been grumbling, and they want to make David their king too. Now do it. For the Lord promised David, by my servant David, I will rescue my people Israel from the hand of the Philistines and from the hand of all the enemies. And notice that that's in quote. So this is something that was known that God had done, and God had told David that by my servant, so God speaking, by my servant David, I will rescue my people Israel from the hand of the Philistines and from the hand of all their enemies, because David is God's choice to be king. Verse 19. Abner also spoke to the Benjamites in person. So Abner is politicking. He is stumping. He is meeting with these groups individually, paving the way, planting the field, paving the way to make David, to have David be accepted by all the tribes of Israel, so that he could be king from Dan to Beersheba, from one end of the nation to the other. Abner also spoke to the Benjamites in person. Then he went to Hebron to tell David everything that Israel and the whole tribe of Benjamin wanted to do. So Abner has placed himself in the position of emissary for the tribes of Israel to come to David and say, look, I want you to know what I've been doing. I want to tell you what the people are thinking. When Abner, who had 20 men with him, came to David at Hebron, David prepared a feast for him and his men. So he accepted, or he welcomed Abner in peace and made it into a state dinner when Abner was there. Then Abner said to David, let me go at once and assemble all Israel for my lord the king. He's referring to David here. So he's calling David his lord. He is pledging his allegiance to David. Let me go at once now. Let me do it now and assemble all Israel for you, my lord, David, the king, so that they may make a covenant with you and that you may rule over all your heart's desires. So David sent Abner away and he went in peace. God anointed David through Samuel. Then the elders of Judah anointed David to be their king. And soon the elders of Israel will come together and anoint David a third time, making him the king of all Israel. But now we've got some intrigue that has to take place. Just then, David's men and Joab returned from a raid and brought with them a great spoil of plunder. This is how you paid the bills, by raiding other nations and other lands and bringing back the spoils. But Abner was no longer with David in Hebron. Abner had left. This is significant. Remember what I said at the beginning of our study today about Hebron being a sanctuary city? Abner was no longer with David in Hebron because David had sent him away and he had gone in peace. When Joab and all the soldiers with him arrived, he was told that Abner, son of Ner, had come to the king and that the king had sent him away and that he had gone in peace. So Joab went to the king and said, what have you done? Look, Abner came to you. We had him, and you let him go. We had him. What's he talking about? Retribution. Now he is gone. You know, Abner, son of Ner, he came to deceive you and observe your movements and find out everything about you. You know he was just acting like a spy. You know he was just gathering intelligence. You know that you can't trust him and he can't be trusted. Joab then left David and sent messengers after Abner, and they brought him back from the cistern at Sirah. But David did not know it. So David didn't know anything about, legitimately didn't know anything about what Joab was doing. Now, when Abner returned to Hebron, so Abner's thinking that he is following a royal decree, but he's being tricked to return to Hebron. Joab took him aside into an inner chamber, as if to speak with him privately, and there to avenge the blood of his brother Asael, Joab stabbed him in the stomach and he died. Remember how Asael died, right? So Abner had hit him in the stomach with the back of his spear, and it went through his body. And so, as a almost poetic retribution, Joab stabs him in the stomach. like he did to his brother. And Abner dies. Later, when David heard about this, he said, I and my kingdom are forever innocent before the Lord concerning the blood of Abner, son of Ner. May his blood fall on the head of Joab and on his whole family. Wow. So David is saying, I didn't know anything about this. I am completely innocent. I did not do this. It was all Joab. And may may Abner's blood fall on the head of Joab and on his whole family. Now, um, David gives a lament. Well, I'm going to wait just a minute. We'll get there. Verse 29, may his blood fall on the head of Joab and his whole family. May Joab's family never be without someone who has running sore or has a running sore or leprosy or leans on a crutch or who falls by the sword or who lacks food. He's basically putting a curse, speaking a curse on Joab's family, that may someone in his family always be poor, sickly, or handicapped. Verse 30, Joab and his brother Abishai murdered Abner because he had killed their brother Azael in the battle of Gibeon. So it's talking about the retribution, the blood feud. Then David said to Joab and all the people with him, tear your clothes and put on sackcloth and walk in mourning in front of Abner. King David himself, so now this is the transition that the author does within this transition. He's now calling him King David himself walk behind the bier. And I didn't have the opportunity to look up the BIER to see what that was. So I apologize for that. They buried Abner in Hebron, and the king wept aloud at Abner's tomb. All the people wept also. The king sang this lament for Abner. So David is a poet. David is a writer. David is an expressive personality. And this is how David shows his remorse. This is how David expresses his mourning for the death of Abner. Should Abner have died as the lawless died? Now, other translations say it differently. Should Abner have died like a fool or as a fool, is what it says. What does that mean? Let's finish his lament. Should Abner have died as the lawless die? Your hands were not bound, your feet were not fettered. You fell as one falls before the wicked. How is it that Abner would have been foolish or would have died or did die as the lawless died? Because Hebron was a sanctuary city, and Abner could not have touched, I'm sorry, Joab could not have touched Abner while he was in the town of Hebron. It was a sanctuary city. It was the law. So the lawless would not run to a sanctuary city to allow a priest to sort out the details and figure out who was truly at fault. Instead, Joab got Abner to return to the outskirts of Hebron, so on the territory around the city, so that Abner was not in a sanctuary city and that Abner could take out his retribution because there was nothing legally stopping him to do that, even though morally there was plenty. You fell as one falls before the wicked, and all the people wept over him. Then they all came and urged David to eat something while it was still day. But David took an oath, saying, may God deal with me, be it ever so severely, if I taste bread or anything else before the sun sets. So David was being sincere in his mourning of Abner. And to show his sincerity, he took an oath to not eat anything before the sun sets. Verse 36, all the people took note and were pleased. Why? Why were they pleased? Because David was acting kingly. David was acting consistent in the office that he had been given by God. Whether you were on David's side or whether you were on Saul's side or Ishbosheth's side, everyone agreed that Abner was a great man. He was self-serving. He really wanted to be Saul's replacement, but he had no valid claim on the throne, so he ruled through Abner. But he was still recognized as being a loyal person to Saul and a great man. And the nation mourned, and David mourned along with them. All the people took note and were pleased. Indeed, everything the king did pleased them. So on that day, all the people and all Israel knew that the king had no part in the murder of Abner, son of Ner. David's behavior was consistent with not being guilty of Abner's death himself. Verse 38, then the king said to his men, do you not realize that a commander and a great man has fallen in Israel this day? And today, though I am anointed the king, I am weak, and the sons of Zeruiah are too strong for me. May the Lord repay the evildoer according to his evil deeds. Now it's interesting that Joab remains the captain of David's army through the rest of David's reign. But then when Solomon, after David's death, David dies at about age 70, after Solomon is installed and takes over as king, he has Joab executed. Thoughts, comments?
The beer, BIER, is basically like a board, or it's a carrying article, so that you put the body on that and then you cover it up.
Oh, kind of like the hearse and the
Yeah,
procession. Oh,
yeah.
thank you.
So
Thank
it's
you,
just a
Steve.
means of transport. Since I wasn't in on the earlier part of the call, did you all talk about when we're going to get together that Saturday?
We did not.
Do we still have a date?
Hold on just a second here.